What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you how to make your budget keyboard go from sounding like this to this. So jokes aside, I'm going to show you how to mod your keyboard to sound significantly better for under $100. Stick around to the end for a sound test. If you haven't seen my last video reviewing a $25 10 kilos keyboard, I highly recommend you check it out. I had a lot of fun filming it, and it's my first official review on the channel. So obviously for $25, this thing sounds like dog water, and that brings me to the point of this video. Can I make this keyboard sound like a thocky masterpiece? Or will the hours I spend desoldering, lubing, filming, and reassembling all be for nothing? Let's take this bad boy apart. First off, we need to remove all the keycaps. Luckily, this keyboard came with a keycap puller, so you can use that if you decide to replicate this build, but be warned, this will leave a mark on your keycaps, so I recommend you buy a metal keycap puller like what I have. Now that the keycaps are off, we need to figure out how to take this thing apart. There are several screws that secure the plate and PCB to the case, which any Phillips head screwdriver should be able to remove. Now that we've removed the screws, we can free the PCB and plate from the case, and in this case you can just shake the plate loose. Next, we can unplug this cable here and separate the PCB and plate from the case. This next step is super intimidating, but with the right technique and tools, it can be a breeze. So we want to desolder the switches and remove them from the plate. To do this, you will need a soldering iron, any kind of solder. I recommend a 60-40 blend of lead and tin with a flux core, and a desoldering pump, which comes with most soldering iron kits. For an in-depth guide on desoldering, I recommend you check out Juju Cable's soldering and desoldering guides, as my desoldering is still pretty scuffed, and I don't want to give you any poor instructions. So I really hate desoldering with the pump because it takes so long, so I invested in this. This is the Hako desoldering gun, and it makes my life a lot easier. Also, Hako go burr. Now that we've successfully desoldered every switch, we can now free the switches from the plate. I'm using a switch puller I got off of Amazon for a few dollars, which makes life a lot easier. If your switches don't feel like they're coming loose, you may need to reapply some solder to the joints you desoldered and try again. Now because these switches are clicky and I'm Team Linear Gang for life, shout out Hippotech, we'll have to get rid of all evidence of clickies ever existing in my house. Next up, we can separate the plate and PCB so I can add foam to the plate. Today I'm using neoprene foam from a previous keyboard project, as I can stick it onto whatever I need to. Essentially, I'm adding small strips everywhere and filling up as much space on the plate as I can. This should help add some dampening and reduce some pinging coming from the plate. Up next is perhaps the most dreaded part of any keyboard build, lubing and filming the switches. These are Gateron Milky Yellows. They're a linear switch that actuate at 55 grams and cost roughly 23 cents a switch. I got these and some KBD fan switch films from Shockport Keyboards. They're a Canadian vendor based in Ontario, and for you Canadians, shipping is free. The owner Jeremy is super responsive on his Discord and is constantly listening to feedback and improving his site. So to lube a switch, first you're going to need to open up the housing. I recommend getting a switch opener because it makes life so much easier. Once I open up all my switches, I like to separate the parts into individual bowls so I know where each individual piece is. First up is lubing the springs. I personally bag lube my springs, but you can also use your precious Krytox on your springs by lubing the tops and bottoms of the springs like so. To bag lube, I like to use Krytox GPL 105 by dripping 3 to 4 drops of oil per 10 switches in the bag. I then massage the springs around for an even coat. Next, you're going to inflate the bag and shake the springs around for about a minute. After this, I then lube the bottom housing by lubing these two side rails, this back piece here, and then the inside of this spring holder, and I do a ring around it for good measure. Up next, I like to film my switches by gently placing the film onto the bottom housing like so, and this may take a few tries if your hands are shaky. Next, we can place down our spring, and then move on to lubing the stems. I like to use a stem holder that I picked up from Amazon, and lube all areas of the stem except for the part that the keycap touches. For tactile switches, if you want to keep maximum tactility, I recommend not lubing the legs. Next, we place the stem into the switch with the legs facing the metal leaf, and finally, we can lube the top housing. I like to lube all four sides of the top housing, but some people skip this step altogether. Now that everything's been lubed, we can seal the switch. Make sure that everything is lined up as it originally was when you took apart the switch, and press down firmly. Repeat this process 90 or more times, and you're done lubing. I personally recommend getting a lube station as it speeds up the process quite a bit and keeps things relatively organized. Up next is stabilizers. This board came with plate mount stabilizers, which are fairly rattly and wobbly, but I have a few easy fixes for this. Firstly, you want to disassemble the stabilizer by snapping out the stabilizer bar from the stabilizer housing, and then you simply can shake apart the stem from the housing. Once you've disassembled all the stabilizers, you want to clip the two legs off the stems. Essentially, there are two legs on each stem which poke out more than others, and this causes some rattle when making contact with the PCB. I'm just using cheap nail trimmers to do this because they work well and I like them. Up next, you can lube the stems. I like to lube all the sides and then get a little lube into the bottom hole where the wire sits. Next, we lube the housing on the sides, on the back, and where the bar clips in. Finally, apply a thick layer of lube to the stabilizer bar, and remember, more is less. Don't be afraid to use a lot, as it's better to have a slightly sluggish stabilizer bar that is silent than one that rattles a lot. To put everything back together, slot the stem back into the housing, then take your stabilizer bar, insert it into the bottom hole of the stem, ensuring it is secure, and then snap it into place. Repeat this for the other side of the bar, and then repeat for all your stabilizers. Now that all the stabilizers have been lubed, we need to tackle the issue of wobbling. This is some fabric tape that I had lying around, which I'm going to cut into small pieces and tape onto points of contact on the plate for the stabilizers. When testing the stabilizers, it may feel sluggish or too tight, so remove and add tape accordingly. You can then reinsert the stabilizers back in the way you took them out, and then after that, you can place a switch into each stabilizer spot and put a keycap on each place, and then test your stabilizers accordingly. Listen for rattle, and if there is any, you can apply lube where needed. Now that the stabilizers have been tuned, we can insert all the switches into the PCB and plate. First up, you want to line up the PCB and plate with each other, and then push a few switches into each corner, ensuring they are all flush. After this, you can insert every single switch, and then you're done. Luckily, the cutouts on this plate for the switches are fairly tight, so they sit snugly, and this will make soldering a breeze. Up next is soldering. I'm using some 6040 lead tin solder with a flux core that I highly recommend for any PCB work. If you've never soldered before, I highly recommend you check out some tutorials to ensure you do not burn yourself or damage the PCB. Essentially what you want to do is touch the tip of the iron, 350 degrees Celsius for my solder, and heat up the pad. Next, you'll slowly want to feed your solder into the hole and let it flow into the socket until you get something like this. Now repeat this for every single switch, twice for each pin of the switch, and then you're done. Now that the switches are in, we need to test if all the switches work. You can use any keyboard input tester online and press each switch a few times to ensure they register. Luckily for me, all sockets soldered work, so I will not have to desolder or revisit any switches. Finally, we can reassemble the board. I forgot to film it, but I added a little more foam on the inside of the case for more dampening as well. To reassemble, plug the cable back in, slot the plate and PCB back into the case, and screw everything back into place. I really like the blue and white theme of this board, so for keycaps, I chose 2 sets of $4.50 ABS keycaps from Amazon in blue and white to match the color scheme of this keyboard. They better fit the aesthetic I'm going for, as I do not particularly enjoy the gamer keycaps this board came with, and this keyboard will be going to my dad. Considering they were only $4.50 a piece, they're fairly good. They support LED shine through, our OEM profile, and the legends look fairly good. I'm going to use the blue keycaps for the modifiers, and the whites for the alphas. I personally was not fond of the Misc logo, so I had originally planned to paint over it with this white paint pen, but the paint was not holding well and looked poor. Instead, I designed an image of the keyboard which matched the colorway I was going for, printed it onto some vinyl stickers, and stuck it on top of the logo. Unfortunately, there is still some shine through from the logo, but I guess you can just turn off the LED. Now that everything's assembled and the keycaps have been swapped out, we get to see the fruits of our labor in action. Was all this work worth it? I'll let you decide in the following sound test. Wow, that sounds pretty good. Honestly, it's a huge step up from the loud, hollow, and rattly sound profile we had at the start, and there's a nice subtle thock in the spacebar. I think if I was to do this mod again, I'd use a little less foam in the case, because it sounds a little muted for my liking, but to some people, it might sound pretty good. I really like how the milky switches slightly changed the blue LED shade, which looks fantastic with the blue accents on the board. The sticker could have used some more work, but it's still a step up from the ugly logo in my opinion. So in total, this keyboard cost me $25 for the keyboard, $35 for switches and films, $5 of lube, free foam, free fabric tape, and $9 for the keycaps, for a net total of $75 US. This project also sadly took about 20 hours of my life, which would have been halved, but I needed to make sure my camera shots looked good, and to get lots of B-roll for the before and after. So after all this work, all this pain, and 20 hours out of my life, I think this was a success. I managed to harvest the PCB and case of a $25 keyboard and judge it up with some new switches, dampening foam, and keycaps, all for below $80. I think this keyboard looks significantly better than it did, and it sure as hell sounds a lot better. If I was to do this mod again, I would consider trying to make the cable detachable, create a braided cable to match the theme, and probably use some SA profile keycaps to really get a nice thocky sound profile. I really like the Gateron Milky Yellows as they have a fantastic sound signature, and they're super affordable for projects like this. So was this all worth it? Probably not. Most of you interested in the hobby probably already have the tools necessary to complete this mod, meaning you probably have more money to spend. As such, it's probably a better idea to look elsewhere for a keyboard and get a higher quality case, plate, and PCB, because the difference between a cheaply modded keyboard and an entry-level custom makes all the world of difference. That said, if you're interested in modding a friend's keyboard and have these tools, this particular build may be the way to go, as the entire build was super budget friendly and honestly pretty fun to do. It was nice to give this keyboard off to my dad after all my labors and hear that he enjoyed typing on it and how it sounds. With that, I want to thank you all for watching, My name is Brownie, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next video.